Okay, on the line, State Opposition Leader Matthew Guy, good morning.
Good morning to you, Neil.
If you become Premier in a year, would you get rid of these powers?
Sure would. I've never seen such an attack on Australian democracy as rules like this for a number of reasons from what you've just read. And what your listeners have to understand is this is an extraordinary, extreme legislation that the government have come out last week and said they'll never lock us down again. Well, if they'll never lock us down again, why do they need laws as extreme as this? I accept that the government wanted to put legislation to the Parliament to streamline the calling of a state of emergency. I don't think anyone disagreed with that. That was a common sense point of view. But then to go and enable one person, not the Cabinet, but the Premier, with such extreme powers to allow one man to rule by decree, I think is breathtaking in an Australian democratic sense that we would see legislation as extreme as this.
Okay, well, what are your concerns with? There's one. There's too much power for the Premier. What else? What concerns you?
I don't even know where to start, Neil. It's a 112-page bill, but I think the point that you've raised, the first point about identifying people by their characteristics or their attributes, is, I might add, while allowing that declaration to be made without reference to equal opportunity or human rights laws, is stunning in itself. The fact that the government has no oversight, that they say there's an independent committee. The independent committee is appointed by the Premier. So you have an independent committee appointed by the person it's meant to somehow be a watchdog against. There's no reference in this legislation at all to the Cabinet. Therefore, there's no Cabinet scrutiny. It's all about one man, the Premier. There's no oversight by the Parliament, as you'd expect. If the Chief Health Officer has a point of view which contradicts these laws, he can table that and has to table it within 14 days, but it still doesn't invalidate the decision made by the Premier. There is just so much danger, so many red flags in this legislation. I find it stunning that any democratic government would put this kind of legislation to a parliament.
Part two, talking about the when it would kick in, it can be in fact implemented by the Premier if there is no pandemic and no cases of disease in Victoria. Is that a concern?
Neil, the Premier can declare this legislation if there's a pandemic in Moldova or Greenland. It doesn't even have to be in Australia. It's ridiculous. I mean, you'd say that and think that's an extreme response. It's fact. It's there in writing. It's now in their own bill. We're looking at it as I speak to you. And the fact that the Premier, again, not the Parliament, not the Cabinet, but the Premier with no oversight, can then start to declare certain individuals as problematic individuals, restrict their liberties and freedoms in the process. One man could do this. What is stunning is that three independent members, that is Fiona Patten, the Green and the Animal Justice Party MP, somehow say that this is acceptable and they'd vote for it. I accept that the Labor Party are captured by their leader and dare not put a foot wrong according to him because they're terrified of him, but that those other MPs, some of whom I think actually have some positive attributes, I wish they would actually stand up for their constituencies because no one in Victoria could think this is a good proposition.
But isn't there a possibility this can get through anyway? Obviously it can get through the lower house because you haven't got the numbers, but in the upper house you've got three members not sitting because they won't give their vaccination status. Well, does that mean the numbers that...
I've been in the upper house for 8 years. It's a moving feast, the upper house. It's not as standard as the lower house, and there are options, and I think a lot of people are talking to each other today because the non-government MPs realise the extreme nature of this legislation and the government's kind of flippant way of dismissing anyone who opposes it. Let's be very, very clear. This legislation wouldn't be being presented to the Parliament if the government didn't have an intention of using it. They've said last week they'll never lock us down again. Well, why the most extreme legislation in Australia? If it's all about streamlining state of emergency, then do that. But this is not that. As you can see yourself, this is about restricting people's freedoms and movements indefinitely if need be. That is not democratic. And I ask again, if we're never going to be locked down again, as the government keeps saying, why the necessity for such extreme legislation?
There was another area that worried me. That it seems that it's a catch-all situation of $21,809 fine for individuals, $109,044 for body corporates, for any penalty, for any offence. This is Division 6. A person commits an offence if they refuse or fail to comply with a pandemic order, which means not wearing a mask could get you a $22,000 fine. Is that correct? Am I interpreting that right?
You are, and more so than that. That phrase in itself, or that section in itself, applies to people who can be deemed under a pandemic order, which I again refer back to is anyone's characteristics or their attributes. Well, I mean, what does a characteristic or attribute mean? Race, religion, creed, place of residence? You tell me. The government haven't explained it, and we're owed an explanation. I mean, that's reasonable to be owed. Why on earth do you need that kind of broad power, and why does it need to usurp equal opportunity legislation, human rights legislation, and it's mentioned in the bill that it does usurp it? Why the necessity to actually put that in there if it's never going to be used? Because as the government said last week, we'll never lock you down again. Well, the intention clearly is that they will.
You can't stop it, can you?
Not as a sole party, no. We don't have the numbers in either chamber by ourselves. With others we could, and we'll obviously try to because we're so aggrieved by it, and we think for the sake of our kids and our state and our democracy we have to. We've at least got to try. And so to those people who listen to this and find it as egregious as I do, please help us in trying to stop it.
We're seeing a new calm and controlled Matthew Guy since he came back. This must be testing. You haven't gone off a bit. You haven't kicked the cat, have you?
No, I don't have a cat. I have a dog, and I certainly wouldn't do anything like that to him. But I am determined to remove this government from office, Neil, because if you ever need a reason why we need to change a government, go and read this legislation. It is absolutely undemocratic.
You just said you wanted people to help you. What do you want people to do? If people are aggrieved about it, you said help us. What do you want them to do?
I want them to be vocal about it. I want them to talk to their friends about it. I want them to post sensible comments to their friends or on social media, or join a political party, get involved in the system. Don't stand there and let our democracy be destroyed by someone who, frankly, doesn't have regard for it. Democracy is not a strong beast when it's undermined from within. This legislation undermines our democracy from within, from an incumbent government. And I also make this plea to sensible members of the Australian Labor Party, and there are many. Please don't let your leader do this to our state. Our state, it doesn't matter who's in government, our state is better than this. It's bigger than this. It's bigger than all of us, particularly those in politics. Please don't let your leader ruin our state's democracy by supporting such ridiculous legislation.
Thank you for your time. You haven't heard a whisper that Brett Sutton and Dan Andrews have fallen out, have you? My gut's telling me something. You heard anything?
Do you know what, Neil? With respect, everyone falls out with the Premier. Go and ask Jenny Mikakos and Gavin Jennings and Brett Sutton and everyone else.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully the state will too.
Matthew Guy, the state opposition leader.
APIA's $100,000 Go Live It Up giveaway gives you the chance to win one of 10 $10,000 cash prizes. To enter, purchase or renew an eligible home, contents or car insurance policy with APIA. Call us today on 13 50 50. APIA. Get set. Go. APIA is an authorised representative of AAI Limited, the product issuer. Read the PDS before buying insurance. TMD also available. Call us for a copy. Competition ends 14th of the 12th of 21 AEDT. Full TNCs at apia.com.au/APIA cash giveaway.